Do not let last night's fear claim this morning before the sun has risen. The bills may still be waiting, but they do not get to name you. Maybe it is 4 in the morning. The house is quiet, but your mind is loud. You have already checked the balance. You have already added the numbers again. You have already imagined the worst conversation, the next payment, the unexpected expense, and the look on the faces of the people you love if you cannot make everything work. Take one slow breath. Put down the phone for a moment. Let your shoulders come down. You do not have to solve the whole future before the sun rises. Let us pray. Father, I come to you before I answer another email, before I open another bill, before I make another plan out of panic. You see this room. You see the tired eyes, the tight chest, and the thoughts that have been running in circles through the night. You see the man who feels responsible for everyone, yet quietly wonders whether he is strong enough to keep carrying them. I will not pretend the pressure is small. Food costs more. Payments come quickly. Debt can feel like a voice that never stops calling my name. There are people depending on me, and I love them deeply. That love is part of why this burden feels so heavy. But this morning I bring that weight into your presence. I bring you the number in the account. I bring you the amount still owed. I bring you the work that has to be done, the decisions that cannot be avoided, and the fear I have not known how to say out loud. I bring you the question that keeps returning when the house is dark. What if I fail the people I am supposed to protect? Meet me here, Lord, not with shame, not with empty words. Meet me with truth. Your word says in Psalm chapter 127 that it is useless to rise early and stay up late, eating the bread of anxious labor, because you give rest to those you love. That does not mean responsibility is useless. It does not mean work is unimportant. It means anxiety was never meant to become my master. Endless strain was never meant to become my identity. I can work faithfully without worshiping worry. So before this day asks anything from me, I ask you to separate responsibility from fear. Teach me the difference between carrying what belongs to me and trying to carry what belongs only to you. I am called to love my family. I am called to work with honesty. I am called to plan, to learn, to sacrifice, and to make wise choices. But I was never called to control every outcome. I was never appointed to guarantee that nothing difficult would ever touch this home. You are God. I am not. That sentence is not defeat. It is relief. I do not have to know where every answer will come from before I take the next faithful step. I do not have to predict every expense, prevent every setback, or prove my worth through exhaustion. I do not have to turn my body into a machine and my heart into a locked room just to deserve the name provider. Father, release me from the lie that rest is weakness. Release me from the lie that asking for help is failure. Release me from the lie that a good man never feels afraid. Courage is not the absence of pressure. Courage is bringing the pressure to you and refusing to let it decide how I speak, how I think, or how I treat the people in my home. I confess that fear has followed me into too many mornings. It has sat beside me at breakfast. It has ridden with me to work. It has made me impatient with the people I am trying to protect. It has turned small problems into signs of disaster. It has made every delay feel personal, and every unexpected charge feel like proof that I am falling behind. Today, I do not deny the numbers. I deny them the right to name me. My bank balance can describe a moment, but it cannot define my value. A debt can reveal a responsibility, but it cannot pronounce a verdict over my manhood. A difficult season can expose what needs to change, but it cannot erase the love, effort, integrity, and faithfulness you are building in me. You knew me before I earned my first paycheck. You loved me before I provided anything for anyone. You did not adopt me into your family because I performed well. You did not call me your son because I never made a financial mistake. Your mercy is not deposited according to my income. Your presence does not disappear when my budget is tight. Let that truth reach the place in me that still feels ashamed. There are things I have not told anyone because I do not want to worry them. There are purchases I regret. There are choices I would make differently. There are moments when I said, I have it handled, while fear was tightening around my chest. There are nights when I stared at the ceiling and wondered whether everyone would be better off with a stronger man in my place. Father, do not let shame hide inside responsibility. Bring it into the light without humiliating me. Show me what needs repentance, what needs repair, and what simply needs grace. Give me the humility to admit a mistake without turning the mistake into my identity. Give me the strength to face the truth without using the truth as a weapon against myself. I surrender yesterday's weight. I surrender the bill I could not pay when I wanted to. I surrender the opportunity that did not work out. I surrender the hours I spent replaying what I should have done. I surrender the comparison with the man who seems further ahead, earns more, owns more, or appears more secure. I do not know his whole story, and he does not carry mine. Keep me from measuring my private struggle against someone else's public image. This morning is not asking me to win the rest of my life before breakfast. It is asking me to meet you here, receive enough light for today, and take the next honest step. Maybe that step is opening the statement I have avoided. Maybe it is making the phone call. Maybe it is telling my wife the truth without defensiveness. Maybe it is asking for advice. Maybe it is cutting an expense, applying for work, learning a new skill, or admitting that I cannot keep living at this pace. Whatever the step is, let it come from wisdom, not panic. Matthew chapter 6 reminds me that my Heavenly Father knows what I need. You are not unaware of food, clothing, shelter, school costs, medicine, transportation, or the ordinary expenses of a household. You do not shame me for caring about these things. You simply tell me that worry cannot add 1 hour to my life, so I release the hours I have been losing to imagine disasters. Return my attention to what is in front of me. Return my strength to the task that can actually be done. Return tenderness to my voice. Return patience to the room. Do not let financial pressure turn me into a stranger inside my own home. The people I love need more than my paycheck. They need my presence. They need honesty they can trust. They need a man who can sit at the table without carrying invisible war into every conversation. They need a husband and father who knows that strength includes listening, praying, apologizing, and resting. Help me remember that provision is larger than income. It is the meal prepared with care. It is the ride given when someone needs help. It is the calm answer instead of an angry one. It is the decision not to spend money just to look successful. It is the courage to make a slower, wiser choice. It is the stability that grows when truth is welcomed into the house. None of this removes the need for money, but it removes money from the throne. You are my source, Lord, and I am your steward. What comes into my hands matters. What I do with it matters. How I earn it matters. How I speak while under pressure matters. I do not want relief that costs me my character. I do not want success that makes me absent from the people I am trying to bless. Give me clean motives. Give me steady hands. Give me a mind that can think clearly when fear wants to rush me. And when the old voice says, "You are failing," teach me to answer with truth. I may be under pressure, but I am not abandoned. I may need to change, but I am not condemned. I may not have every answer, but I am not without guidance. I also release the pressure to look unshaken when I am not. You already know the questions I avoid, the calculations I repeat, and the sudden fear that rises when the phone rings at the wrong time. Nothing becomes safer because I hide it from you. Nothing becomes holier because I suffer without speaking. Make this quiet room a place of honesty. Let the darkness outside remind me that morning can begin before I see the sun. I do not need visible proof that everything has changed before my heart can change its position. I can move from dread to trust while the bills remain on the table. I can breathe before the answer arrives. I can become teachable before the plan is complete. Guard me from desperate decisions made only to silence fear for one more day. Keep me from chasing appearances, taking dishonest shortcuts, or promising what I cannot deliver. Slow me down enough to recognize the difference between an urgent need and an anxious impulse. Let integrity remain part of the provision I bring into this house. I will not make panic my strategy. I will not make secrecy my shield. I will not make exhaustion my proof of love. The weight I brought into this morning is beginning to separate. There is the real responsibility, which I will face with courage. And there is the shame, which I no longer agree to carry as if it came from you. Search the hidden places of my heart, Father. Show me where I have tied love to performance, respect to income, and identity to results. Show me where I began believing that I must bleed silently in order to be called strong. I am ready to place that belief in your hands. Then receive it, Lord. Receive the belief that my worth must be earned every day through pressure. Receive the fear that if I slow down, everything will fall apart. Receive the silent agreement I have made with shame, the agreement that says I must carry more than one man was ever meant to carry and never let anyone see the cost. I place that belief in your hands, and I ask you to replace it with something stronger than pride, a secure heart. Teach me to stand before you without a resume, without a defense, and without a list of everything I have done for everyone else. Let me remember that I am your son before I am anyone's provider. I am loved before I am useful. I am held before I have figured out how to hold everything together. Thank you for every day you have already carried this family through. Thank you for the meals that appeared one way or another, for the roof that has covered us, for the clothes that lasted longer than expected, for the friend who called at the right time, and for the strength to keep moving when I thought I had reached my limit. Not every provision arrived as extra money. Some came as wisdom, some came as restraint, some came as a door closing before I made a costly mistake. Some came through a conversation I did not want to have but needed. Some came through the courage to say no. Some came through enough grace to make it through one more ordinary day. Forgive me for overlooking those gifts, because they did not look dramatic. You have been faithful in quiet ways. You have protected me from choices I once begged you to bless. You have slowed me down when speed would have injured my home. You have reminded me that having more is not the same as being whole. Even in seasons when the margin was thin, your mercy was not. So I thank you without pretending everything is easy. I thank you while the payment is still due. I thank you while the job still feels uncertain. I thank you while the plan is unfinished, because gratitude is not denial. It is how I remember that fear is not the only truth in the room. Now I surrender the role I have been trying to take from you. I release the need to guarantee tomorrow. I release the demand to know exactly what will happen next month. I release the pressure to protect my family from every disappointment, every delay, and every season of less. I cannot control the economy. I cannot control every decision at work. I cannot control whether someone recognizes my effort or whether an opportunity stays open. What I can do is walk honestly with you today. When my mind begins building 10 disasters from one problem, bring me back to the problem that is actually in front of me. When fear tells me to rush, slow my thoughts. When shame tells me to hide, give me courage to speak. When pride tells me I should already know what to do, make me humble enough to ask for wisdom. Your word says in James chapter 1 that if anyone lacks wisdom, he should ask you, because you give generously without shaming the one who asks. So I ask now, give me wisdom for the numbers. Show me what must be paid first and what can wait. Help me see where money is leaking through habits I have excused. Give me patience to make a plan that is honest, instead of a promise that only sounds strong. Teach me to read the statement, ask the question, compare the options, and face the full picture without turning away. If there is a debt that needs a strategy, help me build one. If there is an expense that needs to be cut, give me discipline without resentment. If there is work I need to pursue, show me where to apply my energy. If there is training I need, give me humility to learn. If there is a conversation I have delayed, prepare my words so truth can enter without blame. Keep me from treating every decision like an emergency. An emergency mind cannot hear clearly. It sees only escape. It grabs at quick relief and calls it wisdom. Protect me from choices that solve today by wounding tomorrow. Protect me from borrowing simply to preserve an image. Protect me from spending to numb what I am afraid to feel. Protect me from agreeing to dishonest work, hidden terms, or promises that require me to become someone I do not respect. Let wisdom be practical. Before I send the message, let me reread it. Before I sign, let me understand. Before I buy, let me pause. Before I say yes, let me count the cost. Before I refuse help, let me ask whether pride is speaking. And when I do not know, lead me to trustworthy counsel. Give me the courage to sit with someone who understands finances better than I do. Help me ask questions without feeling small. Let good advice become part of your provision. Father, I also bring you the conversation inside my marriage. You know how pressure can make me quiet, distant, or sharp. You know how easily I can hear a simple question as criticism when I already feel inadequate. Guard my tone. Help me tell the truth without making my wife carry the blame for my fear. Help me listen without preparing a defense. Let us face the numbers as partners, not opponents. Where secrecy has grown, bring honesty. Where assumptions have grown, bring clarity. Where one of us feels alone, bring us back to the same side of the table. Let me not confuse leadership with silence. A strong husband does not protect his marriage by hiding reality until it becomes a crisis. Give me the strength to say, this is where we are. This is what I am concerned about. This is what I believe we can do next. Will you pray and plan with me? Make that conversation a doorway to unity, not a courtroom for blame. I surrender the fear of disappointing my children as well. They may not understand the budget, but they can feel the tension. They can hear the sigh. They can notice when my body is home, but my mind is somewhere inside a spreadsheet. Help me give them something money cannot purchase. A father who is present. Let me look up when they speak. Let me hear the story that feels small to me but matters to them. Let me show them that a hard season does not have to become a harsh home. Teach me to model responsibility without teaching them fear. Let them see that adults can make wise adjustments, tell the truth, pray, and keep loving one another. I do not need to give them every comfort to give them security. Security also sounds like a calm voice. It looks like promises kept. It feels like affection that does not disappear when money is tight. Heal the part of me that believes my family would respect me more if they never saw me struggle. Real trust is not built by pretending. It is built by truth carried with steadiness. I can admit pressure without making everyone afraid. I can acknowledge a mistake without collapsing into self-hatred. I can change direction without calling the previous road my permanent identity. Lord, where there is guilt, show me whether it is leading me toward repair or merely punishing me. Conviction points to a next step. Shame only points at me and says, I am the problem. Help me recognize the difference. If I need to apologize, make me quick to do it. If I need to repay, help me begin. If I need to simplify, loosen my grip on appearances. If I have been using work to avoid my emotions, teach me to be present without a task in my hands. I place my ambition before you too. Purify it, but do not remove healthy drive. I want to build. I want to provide. I want my work to matter. I want to leave something stable behind. Those desires are not wrong, but they become dangerous when they demand my peace, my integrity, my marriage, or my health as payment. Do not let hustle become a religion in my life. I refuse to believe that constant exhaustion is the only proof that I care. I refuse to praise a schedule that leaves no room for prayer, no room for my family, and no room for my soul to breathe. Teach me to work from faithfulness, not from terror. Let discipline remain, but remove desperation. Let effort remain, but remove self-punishment. Give me strength for today's work. Help me arrive prepared. Help me follow through. Help me speak with honesty, notice what others miss, and do ordinary things well. If correction comes, keep me teachable. If opportunity comes, keep me grounded. If the day is slower than I hoped, keep me from turning delay into a verdict. Bless the work of my hands according to your wisdom, but also govern the pace of my hands. Let me know when to push, when to pause, when to ask, and when to wait. If today brings another rejection, keep it from becoming a prophecy over my future. If an answer takes longer than expected, keep me faithful in the waiting. If I must begin again at a lower place than my pride prefers, give me courage to begin there. Honest work is not beneath me. A smaller step is not a wasted step when it moves my family toward stability. Let me value progress that is quiet, slow, and real. I do not ask you to make me passive. I ask you to make me clear. Clear enough to see the next step, clear enough to recognize what is mine to do, clear enough to release what is not mine to control. The numbers may still be the same when I stand up from this prayer, but I do not have to meet them as the same man. Panic does not get to chair the meeting. Shame does not get to write the plan. Fear does not get to speak for my family's future. Give me a sound mind for the next decision, steady courage for the next conversation, and enough humility to keep receiving your direction. I place the future back where it belongs, not in my clenched hands, but in yours, and I keep only the faithful work you are giving me for today. And with the future resting in your hands, teach me how to stand in the present. Restore the posture that fear has bent. Straighten what anxiety has pulled inward. Lift my eyes from the screen, the statement, the overdue notice, and the number that keeps repeating in my mind. Let me face this day as a man under pressure, but not a man owned by pressure. Give me a strength that is steady enough to listen, disciplined enough to act, and humble enough to change course. This is the courage I ask for. Not the courage to deny the weight, but the courage to carry only what you have assigned. Help me rise from this place of prayer with a clear mind. Let me wash my face, step into the kitchen, and greet my family without making them feel the war that was happening in my head at 4 a.m. Let my first words bring safety. Let my presence say, we may have decisions to make, but we are not alone, and we will not turn against one another. Teach me to lead from peace. When I open the laptop, guide my attention to the work that matters most. When messages begin arriving, keep urgency from scattering my thoughts. When someone asks for an answer I do not yet have, help me say so honestly. When I am tempted to promise more than I can deliver, give me the courage to speak with accuracy. Make me dependable, not performative. Let my confidence come from preparation, integrity, and your presence, not from pretending I cannot be shaken. If I need to negotiate, help me remain calm. If I need to ask for more time, keep shame out of my voice. If I need to make a difficult decision, keep me from choosing only what protects my image. Give me the kind of authority that begins with self-control. I will not let one unexpected expense control the tone of my home. I will not let one difficult email decide the meaning of my day. I will not allow one rejection to tell me who I am. I will not punish the people I love for pressure they did not create. Where I have become reactive, make me measured. Where I have become withdrawn, make me honest. Where I have become harsh with myself, make me teachable. And where I have confused exhaustion with faithfulness, teach me a better way. Father, show me how to work hard without becoming hard. Let excellence remain in my hands, but let gentleness remain in my voice. Let discipline shape my schedule, but do not let ambition consume every empty space. Teach me to stop when the workday is over enough for today. Teach me to come home in my mind, not only in my body. I want my family to remember more than what I paid for. I want them to remember how I made them feel when life was uncertain. Let them remember a man who prayed before he panicked, who told the truth before the problem grew, and who chose love over pride. Build that man in me. Not all at once, not through one emotional moment. Build him through the next choice, the next conversation, the next honest act of stewardship. If more income is needed, give me wisdom and endurance to pursue it without losing myself. Show me opportunities that fit my gifts and responsibilities. Help me notice work I may have dismissed because it did not match my original plan. Give me creativity without fantasy, initiative without desperation, and patience without passivity. If I must wait, keep me active in the right ways. If I must start small, remove the shame from small beginnings. If I must rebuild, give me the grace to rebuild slowly and well. Bless honest effort. Strengthen useful skill. Deepen my ability to solve problems, serve people, and create value. Keep me from envying another man's path. I do not need his assignment, his timeline, or his appearance of success. I need faithfulness in the life you have given me. And when fatigue returns, remind me that rest is part of responsibility. A tired mind can make expensive decisions. A neglected body can turn pressure into anger. A soul that never becomes quiet can mistake fear for direction. Help me sleep when it is time to sleep. Help me eat with care. Help me accept that I am a human being with limits, not a machine whose only purpose is output. Your provision includes the wisdom to preserve the person doing the providing. Now I entrust my family's future to you. I place my wife in your care. Give her peace where my stress has made her uncertain. Help me love her as a partner, not treat her as another responsibility on a list. Let our home become a place where truth can be spoken without fear, and where plans can change without love changing with them. I place my children in your care. You know what they need now and what they will need years from now. Guide me as I teach them about money, work, generosity, and contentment. Keep me from passing my panic into their hearts. Let them learn responsibility from me without learning that their worth must be earned. I place the roof, the table, the school costs, the medical needs, and the ordinary expenses before you. Give me strength to meet them one by one, and mercy when I cannot meet them in the way I hoped. Let me receive help without humiliation. Let me offer help without pride. Let this family understand that our security does not rest on one exhausted man pretending to be unlimited. Our security rests in your care, and under that care, we will plan, work, adjust, communicate, and keep walking together. Matthew chapter 6 says that you know what we need. I hold that truth carefully. It does not excuse laziness. It frees me from living as though everything depends on my fear. Psalm chapter 127 says that anxious labor cannot give what only you can give. So I will work, but I will not worship work. I will plan, but I will not bow to the plan. I will provide, but I will not call myself the ultimate provider. That place belongs to you. You are the one who gives life, ability, breath, wisdom, relationships, timing, and daily bread. Every resource in my hands first passed through yours. Every skill I use was formed from gifts I did not create alone. Every opportunity carries factors I cannot control. This does not make me powerless. It makes me rightly placed. I am not carrying this family alone. I am not walking into this day alone. I am not facing these numbers alone. So let faith rise now. Not as noise, but as settled conviction. I may not know how every need will be met, but I know fear will not lead me. I may not have the complete plan, but I can take the next wise step. I may need correction, but I am not condemned. I may be tired, but I am not worthless. I may be in a difficult season, but this season does not own my name. I belong to you. My family belongs to you. My work belongs to you. My future belongs to you. And because these things are in your hands, I can unclench mine. I release the fantasy that one perfect decision will remove every future problem. I release the pressure to be admired. I release the need to hide. I release the belief that love must be purchased through constant sacrifice. Let love become visible in wisdom, patience, truth, and presence. When the sun rises over this home, let it find a different spirit in me than the one that woke at 4 in the morning. The bills may still be on the table. The balance may still need attention. The same responsibilities may still be waiting. But shame is no longer sitting in the chair of authority. Panic is no longer holding the pen. Yesterday's weight does not get to write today's story. Today, I will look at what is real. I will ask for wisdom. I will make the call, open the statement, have the conversation, do the work, and accept the limits of one day. I will not borrow tomorrow's fear to prove that I care about my family. Give me daily bread and daily courage. Give me enough clarity for this morning. Give me enough patience for this conversation. Give me enough discipline for this decision. Give me enough grace to begin again where I need to begin. Father, guard my heart when progress feels slow. Keep me from despising small improvements. One payment made, one expense reduced, one honest conversation completed, one application sent, one new habit practiced, one night of real rest. Let quiet progress become holy ground. And if today surprises me with kindness, help me receive it with gratitude. If someone offers support, keep pride from pushing it away. If an opportunity appears, give me discernment rather than excitement alone. If nothing dramatic changes, keep me faithful anyway. My peace will not depend on a sudden rescue. My confidence will not depend on a perfect report. My identity will not rise and fall with the market, the paycheck, the client, the promotion, or the balance. My identity is anchored in being known and loved by you. So I step forward with a restored posture. Not arrogant, not careless, not pretending. Steady, responsible, teachable, present. I will do what I can with what you have placed in my hands, and I will leave the results I cannot control in yours. May my home feel the difference. May my wife hear it in my voice. May my children see it in my eyes. May my coworkers encounter a man who is not ruled by hidden panic. May every decision today carry the quiet strength of someone who knows he does not have to be God in order to be faithful. Let your peace guard my mind when the numbers return. Let your wisdom guide my hands when action is required. Let your mercy meet me when I make a mistake. Let your presence remind me that I am never reduced to what I produce. I bless this day before I know what it will bring. I receive it as one day, not the rest of my life. I will not demand from this morning answers that belong to another season. I will walk in today's light. I will carry today's assignment. I will trust you with tomorrow. Thank you for hearing the prayer beneath the words, the prayer of a man who loves his family, wants to do well, and is learning that love does not require self-destruction. Cover this household with peace. Strengthen our unity. Give us wisdom for every resource and courage for every necessary change. Lead us away from fear-driven choices and towards steady faithfulness. May the grace of Jesus Christ rest on this man as he rises. May his mind be clear, his shoulders lighter, his speech gentle, and his steps ordered by wisdom. May he work with diligence, return home with presence, and sleep tonight without trying to solve tomorrow in the dark. In the name of Jesus, Amen. If you are carrying provider pressure into this day, share your prayer request in the comments so this community can stand with you in prayer.